Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Josh Franco, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. Welcome to our workshop on American political economy. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll go getting started. So American Political Economy is a new workshop series that is focused on defining, exploring, and discussing American political economy from the point of view of different individual, group, and organizational entities at the local, state, and national level using historical and contemporary news and events. Our schedule for the summer has started with, in week one, an overview of what APE is. And then last week, we talked about the major questions doctrine. And today we'll be talking about Bruce's Beach. So let's go ahead and head to that. So week 3, Bruce's Beach. This is a Google Maps screenshot of Bruce's Beach located in Manhattan Beach, California, which is in Southern California, Los Angeles County. And if you've been through Manhattan Beach, you'll notice this pocket, this park. I remember unknowingly, as I had visited Manhattan Beach several times, it's like, oh, that's a nice park. But with anything public, there's always a history to it. And I'm glad that this was brought to my attention a few years ago, or last year. And I'm glad to be able to share this story of it based on my understanding, which is very limited. But my hope is to spark a dialogue around this, around Bruce's Beach and how it fits into this context of American political economy. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is to describe the Bruces and Bruce's Beach. Next is to explain how Bruce's Beach relates to at least one of the 4 American political economy areas. And then third is to explain how Bruce's Beach can be viewed by individuals, groups, or organizations at the local, state, or national level. So who are the Bruces and what is Bruce's Beach? So according to Los Angeles County, in 1912 and 1920, Willa Bruce, pictured here on the right, purchased 2 lots of land along the Strand in Manhattan Beach. Like many other Americans of African descent, the Bruce family had moved west as part of the Great Migration, seeking opportunities to participate in the promise of the American dream. Shortly after purchasing the land, Charles and Willa Bruce turned that location into a seaside resort that welcomed Black beachgoers from all over Los Angeles and became colloquially referred to as Bruce's Beach. As the resort gained popularity and attracted more beachgoers, many white residents of the surrounding community reacted with hostility and racism. So here on the right is a picture of Charles and Willa Bruce on their wedding day, courtesy of one of their family members. The Manhattan Beach Black community and eminent domain. So at the same time as the Bruces were settling in and building the seaside resort, 6 other Black families purchased plots of land nearby Bruce's Beach and built their homes there, establishing the beginning of a modest and diverse community in that neighborhood. In 1924, however, prompted by a petition from local white real estate agents and other civic leaders, the Manhattan Beach City Council voted to condemn Bruce's Beach and the surrounding land through eminent domain to build a park. It's well documented that the real reason behind the eminent domain process was racially motivated, with the intention of bringing an end to the successful Black business in the predominantly white community. Now, you might hear that say, well, what's eminent domain? So eminent domain is the right of a government or its agent to expropriate private property for public use with payment for compensation. In other words, the city of Manhattan Beach, as a local government, has the power of exercising eminent domain, which basically is a taking of private property and bringing it to a public use. And the argument that the city council probably or apparently made at the time was, we're going to take this land and we're going to turn it into a public park. Now, the timeline for a series of events that lead us almost over a century later to today. So in 1912, Willa Bruce purchased the land in Manhattan Beach. In 1924, the city council used eminent domain to take Bruce's Beach from the Bruce family. By 1956, 30 years later, the city of Manhattan Beach finally constructed a park, which was the purpose of the quote unquote, their purpose of using eminent domain to take the Bruce's private property in 1956. And then fast forward another almost 70 years later, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors voted to instruct their CEO to develop a plan to return Bruce's Beach to heirs of the family. And this year, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, which is a local government that is responsible for administering the affairs of the county in a specific geographic area. So there are 58 counties in California. Los Angeles is one of them. San Diego is another, and there are 56 others. And each county is governed by an elected board of supervisors, typically 5 members. One county, city and county of San Francisco have more. And those local elected officials have the power to determine the budget of the county, how they provide mental health, public health services, safety and fire, and other areas, including how land is used and how public parks or parks owned by the county are used. You might be asking, well, what happened in the interim here? How did it go from the city back to the county? I just want to point out here that there is a lot of history in this area that shows how the land went from the city, and then it went to the state, then it went to the county. So it's kind of like the shuffling around of who was holding the title, but eventually went under the domain of the state, and then through some legislation went under the domain of the county, if I'm recalling correctly. So that's the timeline of events. Now, 100 years later, or just a little over, just yesterday, the County Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to complete the return of Bruce's Beach to the legal heirs of Charles and Willa Bruce. So I'll go ahead and read here the agenda item, which is number 18, completing the return of Bruce's Beach to legal heirs of Charles and Willa Bruce. So recommendation as submitted by Supervisors Mitchell and Hahn, adopt a resolution making findings in support of and approving and authorizing the return of lots 8 and 9 of Peck's Manhattan Beach Tract Block 5 property to the legal heirs of Charles and Willa Bruce. Approve and establish the proposed Bruce's Beach Capital Project, CP numbers 70033, in the amount of $21,500,000. Approve an appropriation adjustment to transfer $21,500,000 from the provisional financing uses budget unit to CP number 7003. Find that the proposed actions are either not a project or exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, and take following actions pursuant to Senate Bill 796 for votes. So after this long saga sparked by the desire of the Bruce family to build a community, to build a place for African Americans to go and feel and be comfortable, and to begin the process of building wealth, having their land taken from them through eminent domain by a local government that was rooted in animosity and racism, took over a century to right this wrong. And so how does Bruce's Beach relate to the areas of American political economy? Well, recall that there's 4 areas: the role of organized economic interest, the embeddedness of race in American capitalism, America's spatial political economy, and coalitional dynamics through an APE lens. So first, on the role of organized economic interests, it was clear that there were local real estate agents and other civic leaders who were white that used the local government's power to take Black families' land from them. And that can be viewed as an organized economic interest. Anytime people share some kind of economic affinity, in this case, real estate, but it could be in others like business or finance or the like, when they work together to try to accomplish a goal, this is what happened in this case, adversely harming not only the Black community then, but the legacy that it left for generations after. Next, the embeddedness of race in American capitalism. So as it relates to Bruce's Beach, by using local government's power to take private land, eminent domain, what we're seeing here is that the system, this general idea that there are market forces and this interaction with the government, which is one of the core tenets of American political economy, we see it operationalized, not at the national level, as we've talked maybe last week, or might kind of go to when we're thinking about American political economy, but we're operationalizing the embeddedness of race in the system, in this case, in the local context. Now, when you think about that, it isn't just that an African-American family purchased the land and was successfully building a community and a wealth together. What it was a reaction by white real estate agents and other civic leaders to say, this is something we don't want. And obviously that's rooted in racism. And this is an example of how racism can be embedded in our system, in this case, taking that desire by market forces and operationalizing their power through a local government to then take someone's property from them. Next, you have America's spatial political economy. So local governments control local land use and are empowered by the state government to exercise eminent domain. So eminent domain can be exercised by the federal government, by the state government, and by local governments. And when you think about the idea that the government can take land, isn't just taking it outright. There's supposed to be some type of compensation. In the case of the Bruce family and Bruce's Beach, it's been clearly documented by historians and scholars and legal experts about what motivated the white real estate agents and civic leaders to call on the city council to take this type of action. So when we think of America's spatial political economy, it isn't just restricted to what the national government can do or what the state government can do, but it's also what's happening at the local level. And the local level is typically overlooked in American politics in general, but with using the American political economy or the APE framework, what we do is we start to see that these broader trends that are observed, like the wealth gap between African Americans and white individuals or families, isn't just something that appeared overnight. This was built over time, and I would say the tragic beginning of the story of the Bruce's Beach takings and now the returning of it demonstrates how the spatial political economy isn't just exercised by the federal government, but it's exercised by local governments as well. Lastly, on the coalitional dynamics through an American political economy lens, it's clear that racial enmity towards Black land ownership was a driving factor. And when we think about these coalitional dynamics, you might say, okay, it was like a handful of people, maybe a large group of people in Manhattan Beach that are motivating this. But I just want to point out that this wasn't the only example. This isn't an isolated incident that just happened in this one place in California in the 1920s, but this was something that was happening all over the United States, unfortunately and tragically. And so some examples would come up like the what we call Black Wall Street in Tulsa and in the Deep South and parts of New York, and basically everywhere in the country. African Americans have been building a community, building wealth, and we've seen these coalitions that are racist towards African Americans would use whatever power they had, in this case at the local level, to deny the wealth building that comes with land ownership. So this is the relation of Bruce's Beach to these four different areas. Now, what are some of these perspectives that can be developed given what's gone on and yesterday's resolution of the county demonstrating not just with words but with a deed to address the wrongs that the Bruce family has experienced? So, at the individual level, we can think of the African American community as seeing this as a very clear example, and maybe one of the first examples, as I saw mentioned in one of the Los Angeles Times or another paper, that this might be the first time that, at least in California, that they've not only apologized for the harm of an action of a local or any government, but then are working to address it. So I think if you identify with the community or you are an ally of the community, you start to say, this is something that it's a concrete step in the right direction. At the state level, organizations like the NAACP and state leaders can point to this as saying this was a model. It took time, it took effort, it took leadership at the local, state levels, but it can be done, right? We can find, and I think this builds up to the individual perspective at the national level, is righting wrongs, right? When we think of American political economy and that second area of the embeddedness of race in American capitalism, we know that it's been used to wrong people, wrong families, wrong communities. And it's never too late to say, to one, apologize, but to two, is to work in some way to right it. Like, how do you go about doing that? So I think at the individual level, it creates this perspective, or at least adds this perspective, that action can be done, that it takes leaders, and that it's never too late to try to right a wrong. At the group level, we can talk about it in the discussion. At the organizational level, I think thinking locally, like LA County has provided us a model of a restorative model. How do you go about take a look back in time and see when an action was based in racism and enmity? How do you, one, build that knowledge base and then say and identify it for what it is, and then work towards trying to resolve it? So the County of Los Angeles, through CEO and their diversity initiative, really did the heavy lifting in moving this from knowing it was a wrong and working to right it. At the organizational state level, just want to pull up the website from Senator Stephen Bradford, who represents this part or parts of Los Angeles. I'm gonna go ahead and have this press release, at least the beginnings of it, read to us. And this is referring to SB 796, which authorizes the return of Bruce's Beach. So we'll go ahead and pull up or have this read to us.
Governor Newsom signs SB 796, authorizing the return of Bruce's Beach. September 30, 2021. Sacramento today, Governor Newsom signed Senate Bill 796. Authored by Senator Bradford D. Gardiner, SB 796 authorizes the County of Los Angeles to return the beachfront property known as Bruce's Beach to the Bruce family. A century ago the Bruces had their land stolen, said Senator Stephen Bradford. Now there is nothing holding back the county from doing the right thing. In the face of racism and violence by the KKK, the Bruces were steadfast, but ultimately could not stop the city from seizing their land and forcing them away. When the land is returned to the Bruces, we will have proven that it is never too late to correct injustice, and that there are a multitude of ways to do so. Today, due to the leadership of so many, including Supervisors Janice Hahn and Holly Mitchell, the city's inherited debt to the Bruces can finally be paid. SB 796 passed with bipartisan support, and I must thank my colleagues in the legislature for their recognition of injustice and desire to remedy it. This bill sets the tone for the future of reparations in California. I look forward to working on many more of these types of issues and solving them with the Newsom administration. This is a milestone for us, and I want to thank not only Governor Newsom for signing this bill into law, but Senator Bradford for his leadership and the entire state legislature for their unanimous support, said Supervisor Janice Hahn. We have already begun the groundwork, but now that LA County officially has the authority to transfer this property, the real work on our side begins. My goal over the next several months will be to transfer this property in a way that not only works for the Bruce family, but is a model that other local governments can follow. Returning Bruce's Beach can and should set a precedent for this nation, and I know that all eyes will be on Los Angeles County as this work gets underway. Today's bill signing is a significant and necessary step in the process of returning Bruce's Beach to its rightfully owners, the Bruce family, said Supervisor Holly J. Mitchell. Thanks to Governor Newsom, Senator Bradford and the state legislature, the County of Los Angeles now has the legal standing to give this land back, an action I look forward to supporting. This moment brings to the forefront past harms and more importantly shows us what's possible when we are committed to correcting them.
So Senator Stephen Bradford introduced the bill in the California State Legislature, worked to build support in the legislature. Eventually it was passed through both chambers of the Assembly and the Senate, and then went to the governor's desk and he signed it back a year ago. And then the two quotes are from Supervisor Janice Hahn and Supervisor Holly Mitchell. Let me see if I'm going to pull up their webpage. I know I had it linked here, so I'm going to go and open that. A little trouble. Keep the annotations. Let me get the link here. So this is the website. I'll post the link in the chat. The CEO is obviously the chief administrator or executive officer of the county, and they created a webpage where a lot of the information from today's workshop was derived. So thank you to them. And telling this history. And as someone who was not familiar with it, as I began to think about how do I, what topic do I want to cover today? I saw this in the news yesterday. I said, let's talk about this. This is important. It's critical for us to understand that. And so here's some of the action steps that were taken. County Board of Supervisors. So here's a picture of Supervisor Hahn, and then Holly Mitchell, the governor, and local leaders to commemorate the signing of that bill by the governor. So finally, at the national level, or the organizational national level, it reminded me of the National Museum for African American History and Culture. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. As you heard from the quotes from this, the senator and the supervisors, this is a historic action by a local government, in this case, the County of Los Angeles, because it's one of the first documented times of this type of righting of a wrong to take place. I would imagine at some point in the future that the National Museum for African American History and Culture, if it already doesn't have an exhibit, will have an exhibit on this to show that even these deeply tragic parts of our history, one, knowing them, and then two, working on remedying them and writing them, is of absolute importance. So with that, I appreciate you taking the time to listen in, to learn more about the Bruce family and Bruce's Beach and how it connects with the American political economy. I look forward to our discussion. So take care and have a great evening.